Imagine being in the middle of a stadium with 60,000 people screaming at the top of their lungs, and every single one of them is there to watch you fail.
Listen to the Kiwis in the crowd just giving it to Quade Cooper.
I think some of them are Australians talking.
Every time Quade Cooper touched the ball, the atmosphere in the stadium would completely change. It wasn't just noise, it was pure concentrated hate. This was the 2011 Rugby World Cup in New Zealand, and Quade wasn't just a fly half. He was public enemy number one in an entire country. And at that time, Quade Cooper was probably the most gifted player on the planet. He was the golden boy who was supposed to bring back Australia to the top. But instead of a trophy and a legacy, he ended up in a bizarre downward spiral. We're talking about a guy who was exiled from his team, treated like a stranger by his own government, and eventually just vanished. So how does a superstar go from playing in front of thousands of people end up in the Japanese second division? Well, to solve the mystery of what happened to Quade Cooper, we have to look at the exact second he became the most hated man in New Zealand. To the rest of the world, Quade Cooper was a highlight reel machine, but in New Zealand, he was a villain. It all started with a rivalry against All Blacks legend and captain at the time, Richie McCaw. During this test match, Quade caught McCaw with a knee to the head. To the Kiwis, McCaw is basically a saint, so hitting him is treason, or worse. And from that very second, Quade Cooper was marked. He was marked. He was in the crosshairs now. And sometime later in the 2011 World Cup, which was held also in New Zealand, the pressure was suffocating. Every single mistake he made was celebrated by the entire country. And at the time, he was young, flashy, and he didn't seem to care what people thought, which kind of only made fans angrier. But things were about to get much worse for Quade Cooper. He eventually reached a breaking point the following year by publicly calling the Wallabies team environment under coach Robbie Deans as toxic in a series of posts on his personal Twitter account in September 2012. He then doubled down and expanded on these claims on an interview on Fox Sports, the rugby club, later that same week.
People are happy with the environment and some that are not happy with it. And I've just spoken up about being unhappy with the environment, and whether people choose to speak up or not, that's their choice.
It was a bombshell comment in a conservative sport. He was subsequently fined $60,000, given a 3-match suspension. ARU CEO at the time, John O'Neill, went on the record and said, "Much of what was said has left us utterly confused."
I understand that I fell well below par of what it means to be a Wallaby, and for the supporters who are out there, my apology.
The relationship between the star player and the governing body was broken. And as we're about to see, the boos in the stadium were nothing compared to the war he was about to start with the people paying his salary. By 2012, Quade was in a bad spot. He was recovering from a massive knee injury he picked up in that 2011 World Cup, and his contract was up for renewal. And you'd think that the Australian Rugby Union would want to protect their star player, but they did the opposite. They offered him what was basically a downgraded, incentive-based contract. It's as if they were telling that he wasn't worth the big bucks anymore. His manager, Coder Nasser, was straight up about it, saying the way they valued Quade left them with no choice but to look elsewhere. But instead of switching to a different rugby team, Quade did something that made the traditional rugby world lose its mind. He decided to become a professional boxer. And it wasn't a stunt, he was actually passionate about it. He had watched his close friend Sonny Bill Williams do it and realized that the ring was a perfect place to maintain his fitness while his knee healed. But more importantly, it was his mental release. In the boxing ring, there were no coaches telling him he was toxic and no suits trying to lowball his contract. It was just him and his opponent. He used boxing as leverage, showing the rugby world that he had other options and he wasn't afraid to use them. He eventually signed a deal to stay with the Reds, but the bridge with the national team was already scorched. He had proven that he was a rebel in a sport that values being a team player above all else, and that's a dangerous reputation to have. If you ever saw Quade Cooper playing for the Queensland Reds, during this era, it was like watching a magician. Him and Will Genia turned rugby into an art form. Quade didn't just pass the ball, he flicked it behind his back, he did these no-look passes and these sidesteps that would break opponents' ankles. But the problem with being a magician is sometimes the tricks don't work. Quade played a high-risk, high-reward style. For a conservative coach, this is a nightmare. Enter Brad Thorn. Thorn was a legendary figure, a guy who won titles in both Rugby Union and Rugby League and was known for extreme discipline. When he took over the Reds as coach in 2018, he looked at Quade and basically said, "No." In one of the most shocking moves in rugby history, Thorn told Quade that he wasn't gonna be part of the team anymore. But here's the thing, Quade was still under massive contract, earning around $600,000 a year. Instead of playing him, the team sent him back to play for a local amateur club called the Souths in Brisbane. He was being paid a fortune to play in parked pitches in front of a few hundred people while the professional team struggled without him. It was a humiliation designed to make him quit, but Quade didn't quit. He just stayed quiet, took his paycheck, and played for the love of it. But while all this was going on, Quade was also dealing with another problem that had nothing to do with rugby. So this is where the story gets bizarre. Quade Cooper moved to Australia from New Zealand when he was just 13 years old. He went to school there, he grew up there, and he represented Australia in over 70 international matches. He wore the green and gold jersey with pride and was one of their most famous faces. Yet behind the scenes, Quade was a man without a country. Because of some really strict and honestly confusing immigration laws, Quade's application for Australian citizenship were rejected despite the fact that he was literally traveling the world representing Australia as his job. It was a national embarrassment. Fans were outraged. How can a guy be Australian enough to play for the Wallabies, but not Australian enough to get citizenship? He was essentially a mercenary for a country that wouldn't claim him. This feeling of being an outsider in both the national team and in the eyes of the law led Quade to realize that his future wasn't in Australia. He needed a fresh start, somewhere far away from the politics and the coaches who don't want him. So he packed his bags and moved to a place where he could finally disappear. When most rugby stars go to Japan, they go to the big teams in the top divisions to make millions before they retire. But Quade did something different. He signed with the Kintetsu Liners in the Japanese 2nd Division. To the Australian public, he was gone. He wasn't on the news, he wasn't on the sports highlights, and he wasn't in the conversation for the national team. He had become a ghost. The only way someone would see highlights of him is if you specifically went to look for it on YouTube or something. You wouldn't see the highlights on the news. Most people assumed he was just cashing checks and waiting for the end, but Japan changed him. Away from the toxic environment of Australian rugby, he started to find himself. He stopped caring about being the bad boy and started focusing on being the master of his craft. It seemed like he was working in total obscurity, rebuilding his body and his mind from the ground up. He looked like he was at peace, but he was actually sharpening his skills for one last shot at glory. And while everyone in Australia thought that he was washed up, Quade was waiting for the phone to ring. And in 2021, the phone finally did ring. The date was September 12, 2021. Australia was playing South Africa, and the coach called up Quade Cooper. It had been 4 years, 1,545 days to be exact at that point, since he last wore the green and gold. And a lot of people thought it was a joke. They said he was too old and that the Japanese 2nd Division had made him soft, but from the first whistle, it was clear that it wasn't the old and reckless Quade. This was a refined, calm, and surgical version of Quade Cooper. He didn't try the flashy behind the back passes, he just controlled the game. He kicked 7 out of 7 goals. And then the game came down to the final seconds. Australia was trailing by 1 point. And they got a penalty. And who would step up to kick it? Quade Cooper. A lot of players would be under a lot of pressure, immense pressure, to make that kick at that time in the game. Quade stepped up looking completely relaxed, as if he was playing in the park.
Quade Cooper for the win. It's on its way. It's on its way. It's gone.
He struck it beautifully. The ball went through the uprights and Australia won the match. And the stadium went wild. It was one of the greatest redemption stories in the history of rugby. The villain was now a hero, and shortly after, he finally got his Australian citizenship. And for a moment, it felt like the story was going to have a perfect ending, and was even the starter for the 2023 World Cup. But in the world of Quade Cooper, nothing is ever that simple. Just when the dream was within reach, Quade had another problem. During a match in Argentina in 2022, disaster struck. Quade did a little move, a little step, something he had done thousands of times before, and instantly his Achilles tendon snapped. And this is one of the worst injuries that an athlete can get. A lot of people were saying that his career is over, but Quade worked like a demon to get back. He documented every painful step of his recovery, showing the world that he wasn't going to let his story end on a stretcher. And after a painful recovery, he made it back in record time and was ready for the 2023 World Cup. But before that could happen, the ARU made a massive change. They brought back Eddie Jones as the head coach. Eddie is famous for being unpredictable. He talked a big game about Quade being a leader, but when the squad was announced for the World Cup, Quade's name was nowhere to be found. Quade went from being the savior of the team to being discarded like yesterday's newspaper. The Wallabies went to the World Cup without him and had their worst performance in history, getting knocked out in the group stage for the first time ever. And while the team was falling apart in France, Quade was back in Japan, watching from a distance. It was the final chapter of his international career. So where is he now? As of 2026, the man who was once the most hated person in New Zealand has finally found his peace. Quade Cooper officially hung up his boots at the end of the 2025 season, but he didn't leave the game. He stayed in Japan, the place that took him in when the Australian system had turned its back on him. He is currently the attack coach for the Kintetsu Liners. He spends his days teaching young Japanese players how to do this. And this. And this. He also became a successful businessman, with his brand Shosai focusing on high-performance gear and mental well-being. When you look back at his career, it's easy to focus on the booze, the fines, and the times he was treated poorly by the suits in the front office. He went from being a beast on the pitch to being a mentor on the sidelines. He might not have the World Cup trophy he dreamed of, but he has something much harder to get: the respect of everyone who ever doubted him. Quade Cooper's journey is a reminder that talent can get you to the top, but it's your character that decides how you handle the fall. He was a boy from New Zealand who became an Australian icon, a villain who became a hero, a superstar who found himself in the quietest corners of the world. He didn't just disappear, he evolved. His influence is all over the next generation of players who want to play with a bit of magic. Rugby is a game of collisions and chaos, but Quade Cooper proved that if you stay calm enough, you can find the beauty in the middle of the storm. His story isn't a tragedy about what could have been. It's a masterclass on despite all your challenges, you can always come out on top. So that's everything I've got for today's video. If you made it all the way to the end, drop a comment and let me know which player I should do next. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button. It's really gonna help the channel grow. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next upload. I appreciate you for staying and watching. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.